It's fast approaching the end of the year when we'll again dive into our December monthly build in the same way as we did last year's. A viewer's choice PC where you get to choose all the parts that I build with. Make sure to be following me on Twitter to take part in the polling coming up probably at the end of November, maybe beginning of December. For now, as we've been building with AMD components the last few months, it's time to switch focus back to Intel, and again, we'll be working with a brand new case from Cooler Master. Let's dive in. Ready to dive into custom water cooling but unclear about what parts you might need? Check out Thermaltake's new M360 Plus RGB kit. Featuring a D5 pump res combo, 16mm hard tube, Pacific C Pro fittings, and the best RGB implementation on the market, the M360 Plus fits all mainstream Intel and AMD sockets and is fully expandable as your system evolves. Check out the link in the video description to learn more. So the highlight of this build is probably going to be pretty obvious. This is the brand new SL600M. This case was first shown off at Computex 2018 and is finally arriving to market a few months later. It's a fairly radical departure from your normal ATX mid-tower design, and sports some really interesting features. First of all, you'll notice that both the front and the rear are completely blocked off. Normally this would automatically go in the negatives column and be a complete disqualifier for some people, as airflow is clearly restricted in these areas. But the SL600M is actually designed specifically to prioritize vertical airflow. And there are two huge 200mm fans at the bottom of the case acting as intake that facilitate this upward draft. The top of the case can be adjusted to be closed down or to be opened up. And so mounting radiators up here should theoretically work better as the air is already being funneled in that direction. The rear expansion slot covers can be rotated to allow for vertical GPU installation, much like we saw on the Thermaltake Level 20 GT. And one of the coolest features that I can't wait to try out is that the front I/O has a proximity sensor that will light up the ports when you go to plug something in, and then fade out after 3 seconds. The power supply is mounted kind of in a funky area, but Cooler Master provides a pass-through cable to the back of the case, so hopefully I won't run into any of the cable routing problems that I discussed with the Cosmos C700M last month. For our processor this time around, and likely for the last time around, we're going with Intel's departing gaming champion, the 8700K. I still don't have any of their 9th gen CPUs, and in gaming, the 8700K is still a total animal. There's not much to say about the 6-core chip that hasn't already been said over the past year, so I'll just let the performance do the talking when we're all wrapped up here and we're going to do some testing. What is new though is the motherboard that we'll be using. The Maximus 11 Hero is brand new from the folks over at ASUS and uses the Z390 chipset, which thankfully is backwards compatible with the older 8th gen CPUs, or we could run into a serious problem. Although it's designed for the 9900K and 9700K, I'm sure the 8700K will feel right at home here. A feature that I've been enjoying on newer mid to high-end motherboards is the built-in I/O shield, which on the Hero covers up not only a host of USB ports, but also built-in Wi-Fi antennae. Refined all-black styling and AuraSync RGB lighting give the Hero a really slick look that's customizable to your needs, and new features like the onboard USB 3.1 Gen 2 header mean that you won't be missing out on any connectivity. I am looking forward to working with the Hero and seeing how it looks inside of our case as I knock more things over. Cooling the 8700K will be Cooler Master's ML240R AIO. The ML240 sports 2 ARGB fans and an ARGB pump top, and the 240mm radiator should be the perfect size to keep our CPU cool. It'll be a good test of the SL600M case to see if that directional airflow really does work, because if the radiator fans here are getting choked for air, we'll know very quickly. Our memory configuration is going to be pretty simple with a modest 2x8GB kit of Patriot Viper LED DDR4 3200. Contrary to many memory kits on the market right now, this one is in fact not RGB and only lights up white, but I think it'll still match nicely with what I have planned here. I think a great partner for the 8700K is the new RTX 2080 twin fan from Zotac. Yes, right now it may seem a bit overpriced compared to a 1080 Ti, which it performs similarly to, but hopefully in the future game devs will unlock the magic that is ray tracing, and will wonder how we lived our lives without it for so long. Regardless of lukewarm launch reception, the fact is that this Zotac 2080 cools better than a Founders card, and variants like this one are available for cheaper than the FE model, even if this specific one here isn't yet available in the United States. In the description, I'll link to a few that are. Storage here will be a single Crucial 525GB MX300, and that's all we should need for our OS and a few games to do our testing. If you're putting together a system like this, I'd recommend either bumping up to a 1TB SSD or using a second mechanical large capacity drive for storage, although SSD prices are plummeting right now, and it seems like a great time to pick some up if you're in need. Providing our power today is EVGA's 80 Plus Platinum rated 850p2. Granted, this is overkill for the system that we are building, but I have some really cool yellow and black cables that I want to use in here, so it's not going to hurt to use a little extra juice. If you were doing this, following along at home, I'd recommend going with something like a 650 or a 750 for a system like this. So that's all for our components that we'll be building with. So you know what time it is. Build montage. So our final configuration right here to my left looks a little bit different than we had initially planned, and that is entirely my fault, and it's because the Zotac 2080 is actually sitting on the table in front of me here instead of being installed in the system. Now, the reason for that is because I was kind of all in on using these yellow cables that are full length custom sleeve cables from Joe at Sanctum Sleeving, then Modderzinc, then Senpai Studios, now Sanctum Sleeving again, I'm pretty sure. It keeps changing, but he does excellent work, and he actually gave me these cables for use in a build that I did on the channel a year or two ago called Project Sunrise. Now, I wanted to use these, and I had already routed them all and had everything cleaned up in the back, and the power supply in this case is actually underneath this shroud slash cover slash, I don't know, mounting points, this combo unit over here. Installing it is not actually all that difficult, but does involve removing a bunch of screws, and I had already routed everything back into the power supply and had it sitting here ready to receive a graphics card. Now, these cables are 8+8. The 2080 takes an 8+6. I don't know why I didn't realize this initially, but when I put everything together, I said to myself that this just isn't going to work, because obviously the 8+6 on the 2080 has two plugs that are completely blocked off that you cannot use. So just for aesthetic purposes and for B-roll shots and whatnot, I put a 2080 Ti in the case that has an 8+8, did all my B-roll and whatnot, and the performance graphs that you likely have already watched, I don't know what those numbers are, because what I'm going to do is, after I shoot this conclusion, I'm going to take this out, I'm going to disassemble this and put in the correct 8+6 pin PCIe power connectors. I'm going to install the Zotac card in this case and then run all of our testing so that we have the testing numbers correct with this card in place, and you could see what an 8700K plus the 2080 can actually do. What I have already done is some temperature testing, and the temperatures that I was getting on the 8700K and on the graphics card were actually remarkably low, and that's with or without this top piece in place. So at idle, both the CPU and the GPU were running about 33 degrees, and then when I put a synthetic load on the CPU, it was only peaking around 64 degrees with the top cover in place. With the top cover off, it reduced to 63 degrees. So it seems like, for at least my use case, this top cover doesn't really make much of a difference. And I think likely what that has to do with is because there's such a huge amount of space up here for air to escape and then be routed either out the side here or out the back, that it didn't really matter that it couldn't just come directly up and out. I think for higher power systems and coolers, maybe 360 radiator coolers, that might be more of an issue. But for me, I tested both ways and there was literally a 1 degree difference. So I just left the cover in place. For the GPU, it was getting up to 73C at load. Now, all of these numbers are at stock settings. The CPU did have ASUS's MCE multi-core enhancement on and XMP enabled for the memory, but the GPU was stock. So I didn't do any overclocking testing on this as far as temperatures go, but I'm fairly confident that it seems like this airflow, this vertical airflow solution in this case, works out pretty well. One thing that I will say though is that you'll notice that the side panel is not in place because it's actually fairly dark tinted, and it was not really all that easy to see in without some additional lighting inside. I think what I would have liked is if the 200mm fans down at the bottom of the case were actually RGB enabled. That way, if you wanted to have them off, you could just turn it off, but otherwise it would provide some additional ambient light firing up and give you a little more visibility to your components inside the case, considering that the window is tinted. However, Cooler Master is marketing this case as both work and play, meaning that it would be equally at home in an office setting as on your desk for a gaming setup. So for that reason, I think they wanted to keep it fairly streamlined, fairly simple, fairly classic looking with the sandblasted aluminum finish, which I actually think comes out looking really good. And like I said on the intro, it's a very unique looking case with a very unique orientation that, for all intents and purposes, every way that I tested seems to work just fine or even better than normal as far as temperatures go, especially if you have the radiator mounted at the top and the air is just flowing up and directly out. Other little quirks that I noticed here, there was a little bend in this side support bracket here. I did let Cooling Master know. However, I do not think at all it was their fault. When I got this case, the styrofoam inserts in the case box were literally cracked and broken in several different places, and there was a big bruise on the outside box. I think it got beat up pretty good in shipping, and I don't know whether the case got torqued or twisted or something that caused there to be a little bend here. I don't think that is in any way Cooling Master's fault, but overall, I actually think this is the best case that they've come out with this year. I really like the unique aesthetic. The front I/O ports with the proximity sensor is a really cool idea. The airflow seems to be working really well. I don't know how it would work if we put like something like an HEDT system in here with some additional power requirements and some more heat, but for a mainstream system, it seems to be working great. And I think it looks really neat. I wish it had a little more lighting inside, but other than that, I mean, that's something that you could add as an end user, and I wouldn't be particularly concerned about. So without being able to talk about performance, because like I said, I don't really know what that's gonna be just yet, I think that I'm really happy with the way the system came out. Just picture it instead with the Zotac card here instead of the Founders Edition 2080 Ti, and you have a pretty good idea of what everything would look like. But if you're interested in any of these parts, all the links will be down in the video description. And I hope you enjoyed October's monthly build. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. As always, check out the merch store link down below, and see you guys next time.